Hey Louis, you know what happens when you take all the cool technologies and trends, throw them in the bag, shake it up, and then pull a car out?
What do you get?
A Volvo XC60 T8 Polestar Engineered.
That's a bit of a mouthful.
It is. It's a pretty long name. And typically it's E all-wheel drive.
Oh, wow.
You know why? Because there's no center diff. So this car has a lot of cool things that we're going to talk about.
All right, let's find out.
So as you noticed, the form factor is the one that's trending lately in the market. No other than
SUVs.
Yep, that's what's cool nowadays. Did you notice the wheels?
They're massive.
21 inch.
Wow.
Forged. They look really good, but you scratch those guys or bent them,
I can imagine it's going to cost quite a bit. The XC60 Polestar Engineered still continues with Volvo's latest Scandinavian design language, and I have to say it looks really nice in this crystal white pearl paint.
Well, the XC60 is generally a good looking car, especially like the R design one that has like the sporty bumpers. Like even the T6 looks really nice. This one though, with some details like the wheels and the yellow massive calipers and those rotors that they're as large as like, what's like the biggest pizza you can order? What's the diameter of like extra large pizza?
I'm sure it's closer to 15 inches. They're rather large.
They're 15.7 inches, and the brake calipers are 6-spot. However, in the rear, did you notice that the brakes aren't as fancy?
No, they seem rather simple.
Floating calipers and really tiny rotors compared to the ones in the front. They're not really that small, but you know, the front you have something that almost fills that whole rim, and in the back it's like almost empty.
For sure.
You know what else they put that's really cool?
The yellow seat belts.
Yep, they actually kind of almost match my shirt.
I have to say, the yellow seat belts are a very interesting touch for Volvo. For a company that's prided itself on safety, it's really neat that the most eye-catching parts of this vehicle are the brake calipers and these seat belts.
However, this interior did need a little bit of color, wouldn't you agree?
Yes. The seat belts stand out, but the rest of the interior is just very dark. It's very black, almost stoic in nature. But overall, the fit and finish is quite good, and it just lends itself to a very simple design that should age quite gracefully.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Like most of the materials are high grade, they're squishy, nice, soft to the touch. I mean, I don't hear any rattles or squeaks. This plastic here kind of annoys me because it's like the one thing that you touch the most, and it's like the cheapest thing in here. Other than that, I have no complaints. I like it. Everything could have been a bit fancier, but it's a Volvo.
Yeah, I really do think the simplicity for me, especially these days with a lot of designers going a little wild with the design elements, I think Volvo played it safe and smart and really has a cabin that's well executed, and again should age very nicely for years to come.
It is roomy though.
For sure, it's quite roomy. I do find the cabin, especially up front, the high door sills and also the high center console may be a little bit an issue for us on the shorter side, but overall it's very well executed.
I don't mind it. And in the rear there's also lots of space. You also get heated seats. And these, speaking about seats, these R-design seats are one of my favorite seats right now.
I'd have to agree with you.
Love them. They feel almost perfect. They kind of copy the BMW with the extended thigh support and everything, but they're really well done. I really like them.
I would have to agree with you. These seats are incredibly comfortable. Those of us who find ourselves cruising or in the car for quite a long time will actually really enjoy the comfort and support these seats provide.
Driving position, not half bad either.
No, I really do think it's a fantastic driving position.
Yeah. Very, very sporty. You do have to tilt the seat a little bit forward, the seat bottom, so that your foot is not kind of like over the brake pedal, so you can get that nice, the angle that you need. But yeah, I found that and I'm quite happy with it.
For sure.
You want to take a guess what you will find on top of the strut towers if I open the hood?
I'm hoping blank plates.
Or maybe like camber plates, right?
Maybe
but no.
camber plates.
So what this has, obviously it's a Volvo, and Volvo and Öhlins are like this. It has a really advanced, let's say, damping system from Öhlins, but instead of, you know, doing what the Germans do, which have, you know, dynamic dampers that you adjust through the driving modes, these ones, you actually have to get your lazy ass out of the car, pop the hood, and then twist those little nipples and count the clicks so you make sure they're symmetric, and probably also read the manual before you do that, so you know what you're doing. And then when you need to adjust the rear, you had to go, didn't you?
Well,
how easy was that?
I tried to take a go at adjusting the rears, but I found that it's far too hard to reach, and I'm not one to really like to, get dirty in the middle of a parking lot to try to adjust some dampers just so I could have a sportier drive home.
The funny thing is, when I picked up this car, the front dampers were all the way to the stiffest setting, and let me tell you, it was hard. It was like I could run a Toonie over and the car would bounce. It's like crazy hard. Now, I set them 10 clicks towards the softer side. It's much better. It's still a little bit firm for the nature of the vehicle, because this doesn't really compete against like the Stelvio Quadrifoglio, right? It's a one step down. So I don't find why it needed to have such aggressive suspension options, but
I do feel for what Volvo was hoping to execute with this vehicle, I really think they should have taken the wiser choice of going for an adaptive system. But in the case of the Öhlins setup, it's a brilliant suspension system, but I really do feel it's a little gimmicky for what you're getting here.
it belongs in a track car, not an SUV.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. On a track car or a much sportier vehicle, it could make sense, but for the nature of this SUV, I just don't see how it would.
It's overkill and inconvenient.
Absolutely.
Right?
I really couldn't see an owner taking the time to adjust the.
You know what you could do though? That's amazing. Let's say your wife pisses you off. You can make that side super freaking stiff, and then this side nice and comfortable, and then ride every single bump on the road and give her a good shake.
Oh, that'd be. I don't know if I'd want to be present for the aftermath of something like that.
Now, going back to that bag of tricks, okay? Here's how unnecessarily complicated this car is. They just had to use everything fancy. So they took a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, they put a turbocharger on it, a supercharger on it, and that by itself makes 313 horsepower. Then they said that's not enough, so they put an 11.6 kilowatt hour battery pack, stuck 2 electric motors, one in the front, one in the back. Both of them together make 87 horsepower. And then they made something that has a total of 415 horsepower and 494 foot-pounds of torque. And they also fitted a 8-speed automatic gearbox that has the tallest first gear I've ever seen in my life. Actually, no, that would make it the shortest, because it's like a 5.25 ratio to 1. That's like only for off-roading, I guess. But then again, who would take this off-road? And why did, they should have substituted the Polestar Engineer mode with the off-road. They shouldn't have kept both. Like, who's going to take this off-road? Forged wheels, remember? And off-road rocks.
I really couldn't see someone taking this vehicle off-road. And unfortunately, for me, the numbers look very appealing. 415 horsepower, lots of torque. It seems on paper that you'd have a really great sporting ride, but
in practice, what do you get?
In practice, I just feel that you really have just an overly complex system that really doesn't deliver the thrills.
Let's do an experiment. I'm going to stop the car so I don't crash. I'm going to go to the timer on my phone, and we're actually going to time to see, by the time I hammer the throttle, how long does it take for the car to actually respond? You want to do that experiment? There you go. Ready? So I'm going to be driving casually, okay? So this is start and that's stop. Okay, reset. And I'm driving along. Okay, the engine is on already, so I'm going to give it a chance to be on. And kick down. 1.30 seconds. Look. That's how long you have to wait until the car actually goes once you do a kick down. And that was with the engine already running. Can you imagine if the engine was off?
The XC60 Polestar sits at a very interesting price point, where you can look at the Alfa Romeo Stelvio Quadrifoglio.
Speaking about competitors, let's think for this class, right? And this performance, you can get an Audi SQ5.
Yes.
Which is probably faster, at least more emotionally connected to the driver, because the soundtrack of this thing doesn't do it for me at all. Like, nothing. Then I don't think an X3M would kill it, so I think this is more like an X3 M40i competitor. The X5 I think is too big. and too heavy. It's probably more of an XC90 competitor. You can get a Mercedes GLC 43 AMG because the 63 would blow its doors off. Like it's it would outclass it by far. The Quadrifoglio is like a race car compared to this, and it does it right because it has the adjustable dampers from the button, and it has an exhaust button that makes a lot of freaking noise, which makes the ride very enjoyable and pleasant.
And this is what really makes me struggle with the Volvo. For all those competitors that Jason has listed, you find that your performance per dollar is just outmatched. For where this vehicle sits in the performance SUV category, Volvo really just does not have the power or the composure or even the refinement of its competitors. And this is what makes me really struggle with this vehicle. On paper, it sounds like a fantastic ride and a fantastic concept, but in practice, it just makes the argument for owning this vehicle very challenging.
Now, to cut it some slack though, we need to understand that we're in the North American market, where we are fortunate enough to have a lot of cars very well priced. And we don't have any tax problems with cubic capacity in the engines. Because for example, in Greece, if you have something like, or Europe in general, anything like above a 2-liter engine would kill you on tax. So that makes the MSRP of the vehicle much higher. So in Canada and the US, this is pretty much sits at the same price point as a Stelvio, and it's probably like 20 grand more expensive than its real competition. So it really makes it a hard car to go to. Okay, like you have to be a fanatic of Volvo and love this Polestar stuff, or your commute really has to be within the 25-kilometer range that this thing can do strictly on electricity. Because otherwise, I really don't see why you would prefer this over a, normal ICE car.
And this is exactly where the Volvo finds itself out of place. In European markets, just as Jason said, it sits wonderfully and it can actually compete very well with the rivals that we've listed. Just in North America, it makes it a very hard bargain to accept.
You wanna switch spots? So it's not as fast as it should be. It's not as cheap as it should be. The question is it rewarding to drive?
Honestly, it drives very well. Once you get around the suspension and understand the concepts and the reasoning behind the suspension, it actually drives very well. It brakes and steering, positive feel, especially for a brake-by-wire setup. I find it was actually brakes were very easy to modulate. But overall, I do feel it's a rewarding drive. In EV mode, it's quiet, it's comfortable, and you can really, if your commute actually lends well to the range of this vehicle, then it definitely makes sense.
Yeah. So the funniest part is that in reading the specs, I actually had to do math to figure out the totals and whatever, and they mentioned like horsepower, whatever, instead of like RPM, like where maximum torque comes in. They mentioned it in rotations per second, and I'm like, okay, let's multiply that by 60 and figure out what RPMs this is. So they really make it difficult for you to figure out a few things on it. The one thing that I found very interesting is that maximum torque comes in at 4,500 RPM. And the thing is, you can actually tell because this thing doesn't start moving until everything has built up some momentum.
Absolutely. And this is what we mentioned when it came to refinement. You can actually feel a disconnect between the electric motors and the gas engine that's in this vehicle. So when you're driving, you can actually get, if you're in EV mode, once the engine turns on, you actually get a little additional shove that can be rather unsettling.
The gearbox is only driving the front wheels, right? Mm-hmm. So you said you felt some torque steer in this car?
Absolutely. Off the line, for some very spirited driving, off the line I actually was surprised with a few instances of torque steer from this vehicle. And it does really feel very much front wheel driven. That's not to take away from the overall handling of this machine, especially for its size, but it was just something to accept and get your head around.
The thing is, if you compare this, let's say, against the Jaguar F-Pace SVR, right, which you could get one for 90 grand. I mean, it's within that price point, and then you get a big honking V8 with a screaming exhaust. that can actually turn and go on the track. I think this, based on the way it handles, I think on the track wouldn't be nowhere near as good as the other the rivals.
Definitely not. This Volvo doesn't necessarily feel that it's the driver's car as its competitors, but for those who are looking for really a technological tour de force and something that can really give them the versatility and range, I really feel there is still a market for this vehicle.
Did you find that when the batteries start depleting on this car, did you notice any difference in the way the power is delivered?
For day-to-day driving, you can't really tell when the battery's fully depleted. When you're driving a little bit more spirited, for sure you can feel there's a difference where especially in regenerative mode, where you're actually using some of that engine and braking to recapture some power, you can definitely feel a drop in performance.
Especially in the rear axle, because that's strictly driven by the EV motor, right? So.
Exactly, and that's why I really do feel this vehicle feels very front-wheel driven.
Yeah. It kind of feels like the more you deplete the battery, the more front-wheel drive biased the all-wheel drive system becomes.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. So you drove this car for a couple of days. Do you think that you actually save gas by having this hybrid technology on board?
For the first day I had it, I feel I did. I was actually able to commute to and from work in EV mode, so I found there was a savings there. Unfortunately, there was a mishap where I live, and the charger was actually knocked out of commission. So from that point forward, I really couldn't keep it in EV mode, and that's where I found some of the savings flew away. It's just understand that, you know, when you can't power this vehicle with its electric motors, you have a relatively small displacement engine having to move something that's still quite large and quite heavy. So you can lose.
And you can hear it struggling when you're hammering. Like, it does feel like it's really working hard.
Absolutely. So you can really feel that drop off in performance, and you know, any drop off in performance will require you to use and burn more gas just from the throttle applications.
So in this segment, right, every car I've driven, the average fuel economy is around 13.5 to 14 with this similar performance. This one is just under 12. So you get a 2 liter per 100 savings, but at the end of the day, with that 20 grand jump in price, you will never make that money back.
No, I definitely don't feel the savings are really truly recaptured in a vehicle at this price point.
So to summarize, we have a really good looking Volvo that's safe as a tank. Okay, safety is probably like unbeatable in this car. It has a pretty big trunk. It has a very well put together interior. It gives you lots of cool things to talk with your friends. But then the moment you bring your friends in the car, you take them for a ride, it all kind of crumbles. And you're like, what just happened?
I wouldn't say it necessarily crumbles. If you can steer the conversation away from how much this vehicle costs, you definitely have something to talk about.
For sure. I mean, I really get that in countries that financially this car works, it's a great car. It's really, really good. For North America, I wouldn't be surprised if they sell like 10 in total. Like, I don't think it works here.
Which is really unfortunate. But it does lend well to the argument that simplicity rules the day in some cases.
I mean, XC60 T6, I would buy it hands down, like immediately. Great car.
Absolutely.
This one, 30 grand more than the T6.
Makes for a very hard bargain or hard argument.
Yeah. Now that bombshell, thanks for watching the video. Please share it with your friends, subscribe, like, comment. You know the drill.
Take care.
Perfect.